Hello and welcome to Leadership PRN. This is the Dalhousie Faculty of Medicine podcast for leaders both new and established. My name is Dr. Lara Hazelton. I'm a psychiatrist with an interest in leadership and medical education. Today, I'm very pleased to have with us Dr. Gail Sullivan. Hi, Gail.
Hi, thank you, Lara. I'm pleased to be here.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that you've been able to join us. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your involvement in leadership and academic activities?
Well, currently, I think I have a couple of leadership activities. One, as you know, is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Graduate Medical Education, a relatively new journal, started in 2010, focusing on postgraduate, as you would say, or graduate medical education, as we say in the U.S., as well as in charge of all the educational activities in geriatric medicine at the University of Connecticut. That has been my role for approximately 25 years, I believe, maybe a little less. It involves initially being the program director of the fellowship in geriatric medicine, which I have now, with succession, recruited and trained someone to do that, as well as in charge of all the medical student activities, which are pretty extensive, including a required geriatric medicine clerkship in the medical school, which I'm about to hand off in January to the assistant clerkship director, but I will still be overseeing. And then our 3 residency required activities and 2 different internal medicine residencies and family medicine. So there's been a lot of leadership activities in that realm. I was also recruited initially from Yale, where I was faculty member in geriatrics, to UConn to geriatricize, shall we say, the VA, which was VA Newington, now VA Connecticut, in that all of the trainees there, of which there were a substantial number, both in quantity but also in different disciplines, from psychology and physical therapy to dental hygienists, as well as, of course, medical students and dental students. So I was the Associate Chief of Staff for Education there, which meant developing programs that would allow people to learn how to take care of older adults. So a lot of different hats, although I think they've all been very meaningful. But the current one, in terms of mentoring junior faculty and being the editor-in-chief of the journal, I think they're absolutely the most fun.
It's interesting. You said that you've been in some of those roles for quite a while. Like, did you say 25 years you've been doing some of this education work?
Well, it keeps changing. But I think I was initially drawn to what we call clinical epidemiology, and perhaps some people might call health services research. I was a Robert Wood Johnson clinical scholar at Yale, and that felt very pulled into that scope. But then when I was recruited to UConn, it was a slide into medical education. I had been in charge of the geriatrics education at Yale, which was quite small at the time, and I had never had a mentor. Kind of peer mentors back then. You supported each other, but there was no mentoring whatsoever as junior faculty. And I was recruited to UConn primarily because there was a mentor there, which I think was very important for becoming a leader. Richard Besdine, who was head of the Center on Aging at the time, provided a lot of opportunities, including this first one, which was to geriatricize the entire VA system in Newington. But then also becoming the program director of the fellowship, acting as the chief of geriatrics when he went on sabbatical, or working at health services in Washington for a while. So that was very empowering, and the amount of geriatrics at UConn continued to increase, partly through his actions. He was center director till 2000. And then at that point, I became the major push for adding geriatrics. So it was a much smaller job being associate director of medical education at the Center for Aging. initially, but now it's become a very big job because and of course I have wonderful people now doing the heavy lifting, and I'm doing more mentoring.
We had, I don't know if you would have ever met Dr. Sharon Strauss. We had her on the podcast a while ago. She's written a book on mentorship, and she talked about, the value of mentorship. And I think it is very rewarding for people often to be able to pass on their experience and to be able to mentor people. And you mentioned succession planning as well, finding people who can take on some of these leadership roles.
Absolutely. And if I had had mentoring, my career trajectory would have been much faster. But I was working with people at the same level, assistant professors around the country in two different groups. The Society for General Internal Medicine had a interest group for geriatrics, as well as the American Geriatric Society had an interest group, which was the same people. That interest group was focused on medical education. And we did work together, unfunded, developing competencies that, through consensus for family medicine and internal medicine residents in various geriatric sites, acute medicine, hospital, home care, nursing home, clinic, ambulatory care. But we were doing this, helping each other, the blind leading the blind for the most part. And it was much faster growth and acquisition of skills and, interesting projects when I actually had a mentor who was a professor who would say, I think you'd be a good question writer for the geriatrics review syllabus.
So mentorship and sponsorship as well, isn't it? Like being able to identify the opportunities and connect people with those.
Have you thought of this? Which of course you've never heard of, so you haven't thought of it. But that little step in terms of being a question writer for a syllabus book then grew into being editor-in-chief of that geriatric review syllabus, which then grew into other editing opportunities, and then the new Journal of Graduate Medical Education, which was a quantum leap in terms of exposure and learning.
So what type of leadership skills would you say are necessary to be an editor of a journal?
It's a very good question. I hadn't thought about it till this podcast. And I think to some degree it depends on the journal and who is your audience. Journals have a character, a feel if you read them. And that has to come somewhat from the top. It may also be related to who is your funder, who is your sponsoring organization. It's often a clinical organization, a physician's group, a health professions group. If we stick to medical education, I think the skills are a little bit more universal, not just completely different from medical education, teaching and learning in medicine, medical teacher, academic medicine, etc. I think that there has to be a Catholic interest, a very broad interest in a field, being very narrowly focused. I suppose there are journals that are that narrow, but I don't think that's as helpful, at least for journal success. So I think you have to be the kind of person who says, who is always questing, always looking outside, even outside medicine to borrow, because the lifeblood of a journal is not to just keep replicating itself. It's to move with what the readers and the field needs. And that means having a little bit more of a general approach. At least that's been my observation. But again, our journal is not, it's narrowly focused on fellowship and residency, but it's all specialties and trying to be every country. So I think that's important. I also think that good writing skills are very helpful. The editors I know have good writing skills. But once you move into the more clinical realm or biological sciences realm, I'm not sure the editors do have good writing skills, because when I read some of the stuff, it's pretty turgid. It's difficult for people to follow. May have extra words that aren't needed. So I think in medical education, we're teachers at heart, and I think it's very helpful to have good writing skills, which only come from practice. And then I also think for medical education journals that good editors-in-chief and good editors in general are teachers at heart. They want to share the information. They want to bring other skills along. And I think about some of the papers I help authors with, and the editors, associate editors, reviewers are all helping authors, is that none of our names are on those papers. And I may have put in not the project work, but in terms of the writing, even more time than perhaps the authors that wrote the paper. But there's a pleasure from seeing something be so easy to read and understand, as well as thinking their next paper is going to be better. So I think there's that, at least in medical education, there's definitely an interest in bringing others along. And that's certainly been the ethos for our journal. We want our readers to be better readers. We want our authors to be better writers and researchers. But it may be very different for different journals and different audiences.
What type of interpersonal skills do you think editors need to have to be effective?
I think it's very helpful to have a team approach, because no one person is going to have all the great ideas or skills. But I am sure that that's not true for every journal. I mean, certainly in the past, I had known some other editors-in-chief editors of non-medical education journals, and I wouldn't say their interpersonal skills were top of the line, but I think it's extremely helpful because you'll have a better journal and the readers will get the benefit. So I think collaboration, and I think it comes easier to someone in geriatric medicine, general medicine, psychiatry. I think we're trained a little bit to listen. Doctors like to talk, obviously. But I think collaboration, cooperation, being able to listen, being able to tolerate some dissonance, controversy sells. But also, most of us are doing this. I get some recompense for this. I get some funding, as do the other very senior editors. But it's all done free. So if it isn't helping other people, if you're not helping your editors, if they're not learning and enjoying the experience to some extent, I mean, it is work, but it's your choice to do it. So I think I think interpersonal skills are incredibly important. But I think there are probably editors-in-chief and senior editors that could use some work in that area, shall we say?
It's interesting you said about your clinical background in geriatrics and how that would influence your approach to your academic leadership. Is that something you've thought about before, how that plays out maybe in some of your education administration roles that you've had?
Oh, absolutely. They call us the golden retrievers of medicine. We play well with others. I've met a few geriatricians that were kind of singular, narrow in focus, but most everybody gets along well with the dietitian, the pharmacist, the psychologist, everybody, health aide. We think that they have the most important information about a patient. And that's geriatrics, because you're not just treating an organ, you're treating the environment, the caregiver, the patient, et cetera. So I think it does help in medical education. And that's where I started with having sort of a broad, being open to things that are quite broad, because you're going to get more readers that way. But there are probably some very niche journals about one facet of a engineering problem that, don't need that broad view. But geriatrics, encompasses every organ and every setting of care and every person in the health professions. So I think it helps. But, we have other senior editors, PhDs, who also have pretty broad interests, emergency medicine. I think that helps. You're able to understand what is different, but also could be of interest to many readers. I think that's important.
It's interesting. We have a lot of emergency medicine physicians here at Dal who are involved in medical education as well. I've never thought about whether the type of maybe academic writing or academic education work people do might be influenced by specialty. Maybe there's a certain style of education scholarship that emerge physicians do versus surgeons versus family medicine. I don't know. I've never thought about that before.
I don't think it's your specialty so much as your worldview. We had a dean of the medical school a couple deans back who is a surgeon. Actually, we've had a couple of surgeons, and they have very broad understanding of the field, which was incredibly useful, being a dean of students and trainees who are going into every field. So I think it's more how that you've had some experience at least and some understanding outside your own field. I think that's helpful in medical education for sure.
So do you have any advice for people who are thinking that they might like to someday be a journal editor?
I think it's very important to review, especially for a journal that allows the reviewers to see the other viewer decisions, which I think is the case for most of the medical education journals, as well as the editor comments, and to read them, even though it's time consuming, because sometimes they're very long, but to read them because you will learn so much from that. And then your reviews will improve, and that will catch the eye of an editor if you want to keep moving up. A lot of places will look at their top reviewers for editor positions. Your skills at writing will also improve if you're doing reviewing and reading others' writing. You'll say, oh, wow, that was very clear. So I think reviewing is a really important step. And then reading journals, reading lots in the field that you're interested in. Obviously, medical education, you might not want to read every article, but get the TOC pushed to you, the table of contents, scan it and read something. That'll improve your understanding of the field, but also your writing. You see how other people write. And I think that's the best preparation.
When you look back, I was thinking you mentioned about how when you started out, you didn't have a mentor and how things might have progressed more quickly. Do you ever give advice to new faculty on how to find mentors? Yes. And I am a mentor to many junior faculty,
Clinician educators, particularly in geriatric medicine and general medicine, but also emergency medicine, pediatrics. So I think talking to more senior people there can point you in the direction of not just who has a lot of grants, but who is able to be a mentor, because that's a much smaller group. And unfortunately, a lot of places, it's not considered, it's considered good for promotion, but there's no funding or FTE, piece put aside for that. So that's pretty rough. But then you get people who do it because they love it, and that's probably okay. But it is very hard. I would, start within your own department, but then branch out and just find a couple senior people and say, I'm interested in this area. Who would be a good person to sort of guide me?
And do you do sort of a formal arrangement when somebody asks you if they want to be, or if you could be their mentor? Do you set out parameters for that, or is it more informal?
Sometimes it's formal because in my own division, geriatrics, everybody comes and asks me questions all the time. But if it's formal, I do have formal mentoring, and then we set up a schedule of when we'll meet, and what the responsibilities on each part will be, the expectations will be, and those might evolve. And generally it's time limited. It goes to the first promotion. It can continue after that if someone would like to, but generally the goal is to get someone to their first promotion and have the skills then to move forward.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good sort of goal to have as what you're aiming for with the person to get them to the first promotion. Is there anything else that you would want to add to people who might be listening to this podcast who are curious about the route to an academic leadership position or being an editor?
Be curious and don't give up. So I'm saying be persistent, but be also very diplomatic, because people above you look like they have a lot of time. They actually wear more hats than you do and have probably less time. But be persistent. The long game pays off.
Gail, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. It's really interesting. You've given me some things to think about in terms of how we can, I know at Dalhousie we're very interested in trying to foster mentorship and some useful suggestions and ideas about how people can move forward in their academic careers.
Well, I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having me. I've also learned some things to think about.
And that's another episode of Leadership PRN. If there's someone you would like to hear me speak to or a topic you'd like to hear covered, feel free to reach out to me at lara.hazelton@dal.ca or lara.hazelton@nshealth.ca. Until next time, take care.